Support for this episode comes from the University of San Francisco's SWIG program in Jewish Studies and Social Justice, better known as JSSJ. The JSSJ Graduate Level Certificate Program in JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, empowers professionals with invaluable skills, tools, and resources to connect generations and ensure inclusive growth. Courses this fall include Israel-Palestine and American Jewish Life, Generational Divides and Future Directions, Race, Racism, and Jews, and Binaries and Beyond, Justice, Gender, and the Future of Jewish Traditions. Learn more and apply. Go to usfca.edu/JEDI. That's usfca.edu/JEDI. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 438, Certifiably Unbound. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg, and there's no Dan today. He couldn't make it to this episode. We miss him. He'll be back for our next episodes. But Rena Yehuda Newman is here, and I say that in a different way than normal. I didn't say our guest today is Rena Yehuda Newman because they are kind of jointly a guest today and a co-host. I'm sort of part host, part guest too, because Rena Yehuda Newman is now a member of our Judaism Unbound team, specifically the director of our UnYeshiva Certificate Program. So that's unbelievably exciting for all sorts of reasons. The biggest, that Rena Yehuda Newman is an unbelievably talented person. They've been on the podcast in the past. You should check out their bonus episode on pluralism of necessity, and also their appearance in episode 331 with Julia Hagley. I'll say a little bit about them, and I'll also say a little bit about this UnYeshiva Certificate Program, because the spoiler is that we are launching our second cohort of the UnYeshiva Certificate Program in Unbound Judaism right now. There are applications open, and you can head to judaismunbound.com/certificate to fill out your initial interest form, and then you'll get an email from us with all sorts of goodies about how to apply. It's been pretty incredible so far. Our first cohort has been so awesome. We'll talk more about it in this episode. And we're now welcoming Rena Yehuda Newman as a staff member of ours whose full responsibility will be overseeing this program, which is unbelievably exciting to sort of formalize and level up this program so that it will have multiple cohorts at once. Our second cohort will be starting soon, and that it will really start to be building a collaborative community of unbounders, of unbound Jews, who have immersed deeply in our thinking, our classes, and are applying Judaism Unbound thinking to their communities, online and off. So here's a little bit about Rena Yehuda Newman before we dive into the conversation. Rena Yehuda Newman is a Jewish transgender writer, educator, independent publisher, and illustrator living and working in Brooklyn, New York. Working in personal and commercial contexts, Rena Yehuda creates graphic illustrations, zines, comics, and even workshops that touch on wide-ranging topics including public health, sex, Jewish teachings, archival justice, and systemic oppression. They are the former editor of New Voices magazine. We are a proud partner of theirs every year through their Jewish Media Fellowship. And Rena Yehuda was, in fact, our own Judaism Unbound New Voices Fellow, our very first one a number of years ago. And we have had New Voices Fellows ever since who have looked up to Rena Yehuda as their mentor and the first fellow. They recently created an incredible zine called the Testosterone Survey Zine, which is absolutely sensational, and we're featuring it in the show notes for this episode. And they're also a consultant and illustrator for Teruah's publication called Fragments. A sidebar about Rena Yehuda, they were one of our very first listener emails. So in 2016, we got this incredible email from a high school student at the time. And they told us that they were enjoying our podcast and had some thoughts. And from there, we've just slowly but surely built our relationship. And here we are 8 years later, and Rena Yehuda Newman is directing our UnYeshiva Certificate Program. So we couldn't be more excited to have them as part of our team. So Rena Yehuda Newman, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Great to be here.
I hope you're great to be here both refers to this particular podcast episode and also the fact that you're working with us. We're really excited to have you as part of our team. I wanted to start with a question to you that, I'll also take a stab at answering myself, but I'm curious to hear it in your voice first as somebody newer to working for our organization, even if you've been connected to us for a long time. What is this certificate program? What the heck is this?
It's a great question, especially because earlier this week, you and I had a conversation about what is Unbound Judaism. And this conversation arose from one of the UnYeshiva Certificate Program cohort nicks, one of the people in our cohort. Unbound Judaism is this incredibly wide tent that encapsulates anybody who feels really connected to Judaism and Jewish practice, but didn't inherit a traditional practice that feels like it quite fits, and has an understanding through that connection that there is a way in which radical and creative change needs to happen through that Jewish practice. And in the context of the UnYeshiva, that's where all of that learning really flourishes. If I could encapsulate the UnYeshiva Certificate Program, I'd say it's a cohort program that's filled with different creative Jews who are interested in all different aspects of Jewish learning and Jewish life, who all really want to do an intervention in order to create a new Judaism, an unbound Judaism that really builds open a future for Jewish practice that feels like it fits in all kinds of different ways and all kinds of different venues. From a day-to-day perspective, a tachlis day-to-day perspective, the cohort program is a group of between 10 to 20 different Jews who are all enrolled in the UnYeshiva, taking courses on a semester basis, and every month having group meetings to get to know each other, foster community, have connections across their different learnings, learn together, have chavruta learning, pairing one-on-one, and get to celebrate all of the different ways in which unbound Judaism is finding itself in their lives and the ways in which they're bringing that to the world through capstone projects, which they do at the end of their certification.
You've done an amazing job of kicking us off there. And what I'd say is, like, chronology wise, we present tense already have one cohort that had our first cohort launched a year ago as this episode is released in the summer of 2023. And gosh, they're cool. Like, it's really fun.
They are so cool. What an amazing group of humans. Just remarkable Jews.
Remarkable Jews. And let's do some remarking about them. So this is a crew, a lot of folks located in Jewish communities that are not particularly large. We have folks spread all around the country. Our first cohort is all US based. That may or may not remain true with our second cohort. We'll see. But our first cohort has a whole bunch of time zones represented, included Hawaii, by the way. Mm-hmm. So all US based, but not all contiguous 48 based. So many folks who have converted to Judaism, some very recently, some less recently, many folks who are LGBTQ+, folks who grew up Reform, folks who grew up conservative, folks who grew up an entirely different religious tradition, folks who are in urban centers like a New York City, folks who are in less urban centers like an Iowa City. I want to give a little of like why Judaism Unbound launched this, and I know you weren't here yet as a staff member when we did that. Everything you just said is true. We want to welcome in to our organization a diverse, amazing, smart cohort of justice-driven, unbound Jews all over the place. We also want to build out what we've termed like the Judaism Unbound community. And I'm really careful about when I use the word community. I think it's overused in Jewish life, and I think it is made meaningless a lot of the time by how it's used. Synagogues just say, our synagogue community. It's like universities who are like, the university community does better. Is every professor, every student, and every staff member on a university campus like meaningfully part of a unified whole? I don't think they are most of the time. And I think that when you imply that they are simply because they exist in proximity to one another, that diminishes the power of what the word community should mean. It should mean a set of people who actually are there for one another and aligned on some sort of purpose together. I am comfortable using the word community for what we are cultivating with this certificate program. I am convinced this first cohort, and once we have a second cohort, that second cohort too, are building an extension of our Judaism Unbound voice and our Judaism Unbound community. And that's really important because our organization has never been about Dan and Lex, or now about Dan and Miriam and Lex and Micah and Todd. I'm just naming our staff members, and now Rena Yehuda. Like, it's never been, oh, this is a Jewish organization that is the set of its staff members. The goal has been to spark a real lowercase m movement, Jewishly, of people reimagining, reinventing, co-creating new forms of Jewish life. And I think that we've been doing it. And a lot of people listen to this podcast, shouts to many of you out there listening right now. And then you go and you have a gathering with some friends, or you read a book that came up on our show, or you participate in an organization whose work we spotlight here. And all of that is success. But what hasn't happened as organically is all of our different listeners and all of our different attendees of Zoom events sort of congealing with one another and building a shared set of purpose with one another. And that's something that the certificate program is really starting to achieve. And I especially think once we have this second cohort and we go from 12 folks to whatever the next number will be, 20, 25 when you combine the two, that's where we start to really have a built-in crew of, unbounders that are building the kinds of Jewish life that we want to achieve and doing so consciously through our organization's voice. And I don't mean voice in the super homogenous, our voice in and of itself is multivocal. I don't know if that's an oxymoron or not, but there's different ways to be an extension of this organization, but we do want folks to be an extension of this organization. And that's what we're starting to do.
One of the things that's been really amazing, and I appreciate, Lex, what you're saying about the diluting of the word community when it gets overused in all of these ways that really reduces its power. One of the things that I think is really amazing about the cohort program is we're taking really, really engaged Jews, right? We have people who are college professors. We have people who are on their synagogue boards. We have people who are organizing song circles. We have people who are doing grassroots organizing and justice work in their cities. And I think that that's a really key piece about what the mission of this program is. It's about integrating. It's about saying that the kinds of Jewish learning that happen in the UnYeshiva don't just stay in this siloed place that is, Jewish education or Jewish thinking, but rather we lead these full lives. And an unbound version of Judaism sees those things as being layered into all of the things that we do out in the world, right? We don't check our Judaism at the door, when we enter into other spaces. But it's more than that. It's really about seeing that we influence those places through the learning that we do in the UnYeshiva or that we do in this community, in this cohort, but also that these other spaces influence us and that the learning that we do in spaces that might not be as explicitly Jewish or not Jewish at all have a tremendous amount to do with the way that we learn things Jewishly. That fusion of things is part of what it means to have a vision for the Jewish future.
So, turning a little bit, I'd love for folks to get to know you. So you, as mentioned in the intro, this is not your first rodeo on our podcast. You created and hosted a bonus episode of this podcast when you were a New Voices Fellow. You were a guest. You've kind of covered all the bases you could on this podcast. And it's still very likely that most of the folks listening don't know tons about who you are. So it's an intimidating question to ask somebody just talk about yourself to the people. But Rena Yehuda Newman, what's your own kind of story as an unbound Jew?
I remember when the Judaism Unbound podcast was just at the beginning of coming out. I found out about it right towards the end of high school, which is when, episodes 1 and 2 and 3 were coming out. And that was also right around the time that I was coming out as transgender. It was also around the time that I was starting to take on a more orthodox halachic practice. And I was exploring my Judaism in ways that I never had. I grew up through a Reform synagogue with a really robust social justice practice. In a lot of ways, I think that synagogue did a great job of raising me. And also, as I became more of a Jewish adult, I realized that it didn't offer me some of the more thick and robust Jewish learning opportunities that I wished that I had. And so as I got older, I went to school at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I studied history and educational policy. I started taking on more and different observances. At this point, I myself am Shabbat observant. I went through a phase where I think I was perhaps identifying as much more frum than I do now. But, I have a lot of love for a really wide variety of Jewish practices and the tensions between, of course, being an out queer transgender Jew and also existing in Orthodox and Orthoprax spaces was certainly a tension that I had to deal with sort of through my young adulthood. At this point, I really see my Jewish identity and my gender identity as being incredibly intertwined. And I feel that my gender is itself a very Jewish gender. And I'm sure I could do a whole podcast episode about cultural inheritances of different gender identities and the ways in which we get all of these things from so many different places. Gender is a spiritual identity rather than just a social identity. And for me, my Judaism is very enmeshed in that. And that tension between those different things, which also for me feels very integrated, it was very difficult to necessarily find one place that felt like a Jewish home. I was living in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, which has a very small Jewish community. It was around that time also that as a New Voices Fellow, I coined the term pluralism of necessity, which was Jews of a lot of different stripes, people who observe Shabbat, people who did not observe Shabbat, people who grew up Orthodox, people who grew up Reconstructionist and Reform, people who grew up completely secular, who would all gather together on Friday nights, usually after dinner, and we would all sit around and we would have Febrangans. We would all have these song circles where we would also share Torah and talk about the Torah of our lives, often talk about the things that had happened to us this week or the things that we were struggling with. And it was really from those moments that I think a more integrated Judaism really came about for me. We weren't in a big city. There weren't a whole lot of options for everyone to go self-segregate on the basis of exactly the practice that felt most resonant for them. And it was actually in that pluralism of necessity when we all realized that we needed each other to be able to fulfill the kind of rituals that we all really needed and the kind of Shabbos that we all wanted to have together. That was the time in which I think I realized those are the kinds of communities in which I actually feel the most at home. As I've sort of ventured on from that point, I now live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, in New York City, a really diverse Jewish community with a lot of different things going on, including 770 at Chabad up the street.
That being the headquarters of the Chabad movement of Hasidic Judaism.
And it is just a few blocks away from me. But there is also a modern Orthodox shul here. There is a halachic egalitarian minyan that meets like really right around the corner from me. There's Repair the World, which is like a Jewish social justice organization that hosts all kinds of different events. There are pop-up minyans that happen every other week, right? There's a lot to affiliate with. And it's been funny that my experience has been, even here where there is such a diversity of Jewish life, there still isn't necessarily one place that I see as my Jewish home. And for me, I think that's a huge part of what Unbound Judaism is about. This notion that actually there isn't one place that we're ever going to feel completely at home. And the thing that I refer to as my community is something that's truly made up of individuals who all have really thoughtful practices, who are all always questioning about the kinds of things that they want to do Jewishly and not Jewishly. And it's that integration and that ability to hold all of these different tensions that produces this really fruitful and really live Judaism.
I was sure that in talking about your relationship to Unbound Judaism and your own practice, that you would talk about the fact that you're an artist. I think that your creative work in the world, from my perspective, is like a deep part of how you manifest your Jewish and every Rena Yehuda-ness. Talk to us about that side of you, because for folks in our certificate program, part of what you do and what I have done is help steer people, shepherd people, whatever the right term is, on their creative journeys. And you bring immense talent as an artist too. So I'd love for that to sprinkle into this episode.
Yes, I am an illustrator, an artist, a writer, an editor, an independent publisher. I mean, I would say when I was first coming out, I made a Jewish zine that I called House of Jacob, People Israel, which is highly inspired by Micah Bezant's Timtum zine, which was something that a friend of mine found at the bottom of the stack at Quimby's bookstore in Chicago back when we were in high school, and handed it to me. And it was really a zine that kind of saved my life, because it said you can be all of these things, and that there is something about this Jewish inheritance where these aspects of your identity are completely intertwined. We're called the people of the book for a reason. And I think you could probably extend that to say that we are also the people of the zine. And that includes Mishnah, which is the first commentary on the Torah, and then the Gemara, which is the commentary on the Mishnah. And then you've got Rashi writing all kinds of stuff, and all of these medieval commentators. Jewish independent publication is a huge part of our history, and it's also a big part of what I do Jewishly and beyond in the world. A couple years ago, I created a zine that I call the Testosterone Survey Zine. This was a informal 73-question survey that I led of people's experiences medically transitioning on testosterone. And when I created it, I expected to get 20, maybe 30 responses, and then it went semi-viral. And I said, well, now I have more data than the vast majority of medical surveys on trans people. I do have to do something with this data. And so I illustrated and put it out into the world. Even though this is not an explicitly Jewish project, right? I've got my little avatar. I've got a little way that I draw myself, and I've always got my yarmulke on. My little Jewish self is always sort of narrating these projects. I think that this kind of demographic information, right, from a really grassroots perspective, I feel like a lot of this came from my Jewish background. How so much of the world is not actually made for us as Jews living, especially in the United States, under Christian empire and Christian hegemony. Why do Jews have no idea how to describe ourselves? Are we a religion? Are we a race? Are we an ethnicity? Whatever. The reason none of those words exist to describe us is because we're talking in English, a Christian colonial language that was built without us in mind. As a trans person, I'm very familiar with the experience of a world not being built for me. People of marginalized identities experience this all the time. People who are disabled, walking around in a world that is literally on a physical level not built with them in mind. And the purpose of independent publishing and art is actually to be able to open up more spaces to ask more questions and better questions and explore a world about what would it mean actually if we took these considerations into mind. My art practice really extends out from that. I am a comics artist. I worked in Linda Berry's studio for a year and a half when I was living in Madison. Linda Berry has remarkable techniques and she believes that anybody can draw, which I also believe. And that's really influenced my styles of facilitation and pedagogy. What does it mean to teach people and show people the ways in which they can manifest their own ideas and to have those things come out their hand through their pens? And that's a skill set that I'm really excited to get to bring to the UnYeshiva, to really help people spark all of their different creative ideas and bring that into fruition through their work in the UnYeshiva, in the cohort, and ideally in their capstone projects as our first cohort begins to approach that deadline.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so one thing I also want to name, I mean, the testosterone zine that you mentioned it's not directly a Jewish project, but it has your yarmulke Jewish self in there. I mean, just to give folks a sense of what you mean there, you created what is, it's not like a PhD dissertation, but it's a study. Like you took a survey, and most academic-minded studies, even if they're not, university approved, they don't have illustrations and fun comics in them. Yours does. What you're doing there is you're taking the realm of that which is quote unquote serious, a study about how different people use testosterone and actually really important data that is not available even to a lot of doctors. There has not been enough research on this, and it has real life consequences for actual people. And we're going to sprinkle in comics. They're not unserious, right? Like all these things are in quotes, but you're doing what to me is exactly what our organization has striven to be, which is simultaneously serious and thoughtful, but not in an aggressive way that feels unapproachable. And that's what we're trying to bring to this program. Like my dream is that each person in this certificate program, as they emerge from it, they will have crafted and honed that skill, of bringing every element of themselves together. I mean, what you just described is you have a history of bringing together parts of yourself, Jewish, gender, artist, and having them live together literally on one page or one website. You are helping our certificate program students do the same with their different life experiences. And my dream is that each of them, they will have done that blending act and distilled, not that anybody is distillable to one page or one teaching or whatever, but that they will have brought their full self to a capstone project, to their communities. And I hope that the way that happens is in that informal/formal simultaneously format where people are bridging the divide between that which is important, in italics, quotes, and that which is fun, also in italics or quote. Like it's a big problem that we don't do that bridging work. And so the question I have is that's kind of my vision for what certificate program students will be emerging with. My question for you is in 10 years, everything flows exactly as you dream this certificate program would be. What will have happened? What will students emerge with And also not just on so like there's the individual question, what will each student have emerged with in the world? And also what collectively will the cohort of alumni be at that point? Like what's our goal here?
It's a great question. I'm going to start with the first part of it about the integration of that which we traditionally see as being quote unquote important, and then the things that seem fun, but the fact that we often see that as being extraneous, when in fact, actually, it's exactly those things that capture our imagination, where the passion lies, that allows something truly creative and new to come into the world, that actually allows the information to be communicated. These days, I do actually a lot of teaching at various colleges and universities based on the testosterone surveys. I get invited as a guest speaker to come into colleges of sciences and to various work groups for PhD students who are working on various research projects and talk about what is the value of adding drawing and graphic. I truly believe that every science grant that ever gets written will also have a budget line for artists. And I think the world would be a much better place if they did. Imagine if every research paper you ever read had a comic that the author of that research paper wrote about their process, how much different the way that we would relate to that information would be. And the reason for that is not just because it's fun, but because it actually allows us to connect in a human-to-human way with the information that's in front of us in a way that allows something new to come into being. It's about actually being effective. And it's about being able to make that information truly be of service to the people who need it. And so when you ask me that question about the certificate program, I feel really excited and inspired by the idea of all of the people in the certificate program getting to integrate all of the parts of themselves with the kinds of media and modality that matter most to them. I think one of the things that people in Judaism Unbound have in common, people who listen to the podcast, attend the UnYeshiva, are on our staff, are in their certificate program, have, is an understanding or a feeling that much of Jewish life, as we've inherited it, has become quite stale. Going through a certificate in Unbound Judaism is about making it come alive again and helping support other people in that process of reinvigorating their own Judaism through the things that really make us feel alive. In terms of goals for the next 10 years, right? I could see some beautiful book that we put together where each page is a different certificate program graduate talking about what their capstone project was. All kinds of things, including song circles and protests and performance art and published pieces. We have one student who's currently thinking about creating a program and curriculum for people who would be conscientious objectors if there were ever to be a draft of the United States from a Jewish religious lens. Brilliant projects that are really about what somebody's avoda, what somebody's personal and spiritual work is in the world, finding form in a way that serves the rest of the Jews in their immediate community or in their community as it's bound by internet. One of the things that's also very cool about the certificate program, and Lex, you mentioned this in the beginning, is that this is a group of people who I really believe are a community that's not actually bound by space. And I can't think of anything more cool and diasporic for the year 5784 than to be creating a robust network of Jewish thinkers and Jewish leaders who are all trying to breathe life back into Jewish practice truly across distance. It is an incredibly diasporic thing to have a certificate program that is not based in one time zone and still considers itself to be a community of thought. In 10 years, I really look forward to having all of these different people and places who are connected as chavrutas, as chavuras, right? Maybe as little collectives or groups that come through the UnYeshiva and really see themselves as being thought partners and are able to infuse the places that they live, whether that's in large Jewish communities like in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where I live, or much smaller Jewish communities where there isn't necessarily even one institution or place that would be considered a regular shul or synagogue. All Jews from many walks of life, people who are on these Pew surveys often seen as being quote unquote unaffiliated, who are in fact Jews who have just been waiting for robust forms of Jewish life. That's something that makes them excited, that they can be connected to all of the different waves that our alumni are making in the Jewish world that really speak to who they are.
Yo, speedily and in our days, let's have this happen. Bimhera
Amen.
That's the Hebrew for that. You use the word avoda, avodah. Like I'm saying it both ways because I think some people have heard one and it'll light up. Oh yeah, avodah. I've heard that come up, and avoda might not have lit that up for them. I think that word we haven't spoken a lot about on our podcast, but I love this opportunity to do so. So in Pirkei Avot, in the section of the Mishnah that is most widely discussed and circulated because it's juicy. It's about sort of ethical teachings, very user friendly. There's a famous section. It's actually like the second thing in the entire book, Pirkei Avot, that says the world stands on three things. If you don't have these three things, like the world kind of collapses. It's like a three-legged chair, and like if there's only two legs, it doesn't really work as a chair, right? But they're Torah, which we do talk about a lot of this podcast. And then the second one is avoda, which you were talking about as sort of a person's contributions, a person's labor, work in the world. Like it kind of means work, but I hate translating it that way because that feels so stale, to use a word you used. To me, Torah and avodah are really intertwined. They're not really two separate legs. And the third one is gemilut chasadim, which is, acts of kind-heartedness, something like that. And the avoda one, I think, is often seen as alienating to folks in our Unbound world because it was associated with the sacrifices in the temple. And it was transmuted to mean labor. I mean, the political party in Israel, the Labor Party, is called avodah, which is maybe sort of a rehabilitation of the word. But I don't love that either. What I feel like is the case with Torah and avodah, we talk a lot about like everybody bringing their unique Torah to the world. Torah, I think a lot of things are Torah, but it does tend to boil down to like, what's a person's teaching in the world? What's the Torah that only you, Rena Yehuda, that only I, Lex, that only, every one of the listeners here has their unique Torah. But I do think that's kind of a teaching. Avoda is sort of a distilled action as opposed to a distilled thought or teaching. And that's what I think our capstone projects are. Like that, it's actually, I've been thinking about it as like people channeling their own Torah, but I think you're right. I think it's their avoda. What are your hopes for how the individuals of this certificate program and sort of the collective of the certificate program will bring their doings, their unique contributions, not just in thinking, but also through, gathering people, bringing folks together, doing forms of concrete action?
The way that I like to think about it, right? Torah is the teaching. It's the essence of that thing, but the avoda is the vehicle. It's the medium. It's the modality through which that teaching is able to find form. So while I might have all of these ideas about Judaism and spirituality and gender and anti-fascism and liberation, right? These are the ideas that I'm working with. For me, comics, for example, is part of my avoda. It's the vehicle through which that comes into being. It's the doing, the action. There is a famous teaching in the Talmud where you have rabbis arguing about which is greater, study or putting things into being. And one rabbi says study is greater, and the other says action is greater. And then they end up saying study is greatest because it leads to action. You can't, and frankly, you shouldn't have one without the other. My hopes as the director of the certificate program in Unbound Judaism is that each member of these cohorts is going to be able to not just distill what their Torah is, but to also really figure out what their avoda is. What are the ways in which they're putting that into action? There are a lot of B'nai Mitzvah students, right, who do a mitzvah project, right, as a part of their coming of age. And I think this is kind of like the grown-up version of that. It's saying, now that you have walked in the world as a Jew, and you have gone about your business as a person in the world who sees injustices, who sees beauty, who sees spirituality, all of these different facets, how are you going to put those things that you see as needing to be communicated to other people out to others? We're not having people just write a thesis that gets shelved on a bookshelf in some library that nobody's ever going to read. What we ask people to do is to take all of the ideas that they have generated through their different courses, combining things through different places in the UnYeshiva, through all of these different teachers and courses and conversations in the cohort, and to be able to create something that is going to touch the lives of more and more people outside in the world. We understand that that work that we do in the world is absolutely critical to the mission of Unbound Judaism and actually creating a Jewish future that connects with who we are for the Jewish future that we actually need.
I'm flashing to something that I haven't thought about in like probably 12 years. At my summer camp, it was a requirement of every year's counselor and training cohort, or maybe it was when we were in 10th grade, whatever it was, had to do an avodah project. Like literally, we're talking about the word avodah, like, and what that meant at my summer camp was you had to like create something together that in some way contributed to the future of camp. So often it was like you'd make a mural, or it could be any number of things that you decided as a group. And it was powerful because what would happen is you'd walk around camp and over here, oh, wow, here's a mural that you see it every day at camp, but then you look in the corner, 1999 Shoresh, like the 3rd through 5th graders in 1999. I happen to know that one because that was my first summer at camp and I was a 3rd grader and we made this thing and it was still up like 12 years later when I was a counselor, right? Like you sort of soak in that this camp is something everybody contributes to. You literally materially create an avodah project that is somewhere in camp visible. And that shifts what camp is for any camper. As a 3rd grader, you're not just a recipient of camp, you are creating it. You're actually like making an object that will be there for the future. It was called an avodah project because avodah, it's this word, I can't identify a good equivalent in English because, yeah, it's work, it's labor. There's people who have claimed those words and done beautiful work with them, right? Like I support labor organizers, right? Like labor is not bad, but there is a way in which when you talk about work, when you talk about labor, there's not a level of sanctity. Avodah in Hebrew has this layer of like sacred work, sacred service. And that's special. Maybe service starts to get closer than like work because service, I do think, has a layer of like, it's not just tasks. It's something that is benefiting the world. But I like that avodah and Torah partnership. I mean, I don't want to be like Silicon Valley. It's kind of like content and platform, right? You're laughing. It's like Torah is the teaching you're giving, and avodah, you talked about it as comics. It's not that it's just the modality, but it's the, I don't know. I'm a math guy, so it's like the slope of the graph. If you have a parabola, like at any given or even just a linear line, like at any point on the graph, it's like a certain value, right? But the undergirding function, the derivative, like that actually is sort of setting the character of that graph across all points of that graph. And to me, that's what avodah is. Like you're somebody who is a comics artist. On a given day, your comic may be conveying a particular Torah in the world, and then the next day, some other particular Torah, all of which are your Torah. But the undergirding avodah, the slope of the graph, is comics art.
Yeah. I mean, the Marxist in me is kind of coming out and saying, in this culture, we've lost a lot of the meaning of the word labor because in the 21st century in the United States, we exist in a system where we have a lot of alienated labor. You don't get to see the fruits of what you do. There's wage theft constantly. And you're getting, and that often when we think about the work that we clock in for, it feels very exploitative. Some of us are blessed to have jobs that really feel quite reciprocal and are in line with our spirituality. But most people work jobs that are to get a paycheck to pay the bills. It ends up meaning that it's much harder for us to relate to the kind of labor that we do that is really about our spiritual work in the world. And so maybe thinking about avodah as unalienated labor, the work that we do in connection with the divine. For me, I'm a very theological person, right? Like Hashem is a big part of my life. And I know that it's not a part of everybody. I know that that term specifically is not a part of everybody's life or everybody's world. And people have all kinds of different responses to it. For me, the concept of avodat Hashem or avodas Hashem, which is to say the work that you do for God, the work that you do for the divine, and for people who feel more comfortable subbing out words like community or other people or sacredness or the universe into that slot, I think it really works. Which is to say, when you're really right with yourself, you know the things that are uniquely yours to teach. And you know the way that you're supposed to get those things across because something feels really unified in yourself when you're doing it. There's a teaching that every Jew is a letter in the Torah. And just like when there is one letter that is either incomplete or covered up, the entire scroll is not kosher. So too, every person needs to be able to share their unique Torah. And the avoda that we have is a part of how that finds form in the world. In the Talmud, there's I think this is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In the Talmud, there is a story about Reb Yosef saying, Baruch Hashem, like, thank God for Shavuot, because if it wasn't for the holiday of Shavuot, I would just be another Yosef in the market. And because there's Shavuot, I get to have Torah really be my vocation.
And and Shavuot is the holiday associated with the giving of the Torah. So that's why this makes sense that he's thanking Shavuot, a holiday, for his connection to Torah.
And so the Lubavitcher Rebbe sort of takes that and says, in the history of the way that this has been interpreted, it's Rebbe Yosef saying, oh, like Shavuot is great because if it wasn't for Torah, I wouldn't be like a big Macha rabbi. He's saying if it wasn't for Shavuot, then I would just be another Joe Schmo in the marketplace. And Lubavitcher Rebbe reads this and he says, well, this is like kind of an uncharitable read because Reb Yosef is a great scholar and it seems like that's kind of derogatory to people who are in the market. Being in the market is a good thing. We actually encourage people to be in the world. It's good to be dealing in God's world. So what does he really mean? The teaching here is that in the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which we celebrate on Shavuot, at that moment, before, whenever anybody was doing a mitzvah or a good deed in the world, it was really just coming from their individual uniqueness. The Torah being in the world meant that suddenly all of these things were connected and that there's this kind of unified revelation where all of us have these different murmurings and emanations out of this shared code, this shared book, this shared teaching. And so all of these things get to be illuminated. So when Rabbi Yosef is saying, oh, if it wasn't for Shavuot, I would be another Yosef in the market. He's saying it would be great that I would get to be another Yosef in the market. But having that teaching of Torah illuminates the work that I would be doing in that market. And it's kind of an elevation of those two things together. That's what I feel about the UnYeshiva Certificate Program, that this is a place that people are getting to do that learning, that people are doing their work in the world, and it's elevated by the Torah that they get to learn together and in the UnYeshiva, and then bring back out to the marketplace, which is the place where we're all supposed to be participating.
Whew. So I love that teaching about Shavuot, especially as somebody who has multiple times experienced my Shavuot in an IHOP, which to me is kind of like a quintessential the market in your story. Like, it's not that it's a market, but it's like a place that is seen as just a whatever, not particularly layered with extra holiness like a synagogue. And I've specifically found many of my most Jewish experiences in places that are not seen as particularly elevated, like an IHOP or otherwise. So we're on our way towards closing this episode. And, we're releasing this just before our deadline for submitting applications to the second cohort of this certificate program. And I kind of want to close just with like, people are out there listening and somebody is undecided. Somebody is like, this sounds cool. Maybe. Is this me? Is this not me? Like, why should they feel called to this program? Why should folks out there who are feeling like maybe they feel called to this, what should lead them towards that step of, I'm actually going to apply and make this a part of my life?
If you want to be a part of a cohort of other Jews scattered across space and time who are all working towards uncovering their Torah and putting that into action through their avoda in ways that are incredibly unique, incredibly energized, incredibly creative, then this program is for you. This is a real place to launch the work that you need to do in the world Jewishly in order to further a movement of a Judaism that feels resonant and right for this moment. If this is your calling and this is a thing that you want to be more integrated into a wide and diasporic community of different Jews who are all thinking creatively about this question, then this is for you. And I can't wait to get to work with all of the people in this past cohort and this upcoming cohort to be able to uncover what that avoda is. Because Lex, you said that you're used to having all kinds of different, very Jewish experiences in physical places that we don't often think of as being, quote unquote, that Jewish. Part of being a Jew in the world, and certainly being an unbounder, is to be able to uncover the Jewishness and the beauty and the sacredness that's in things that we don't traditionally see as being that Jewish or that traditional or that sacred. I mean, I spent my Shavuot at the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont, making comics until like 2 a.m. Certainly complicated for me from a halachic standpoint, but also there's a real sense of that's part of my avoda. That is where I reveal my Torah at Mount Sinai. And at that moment, unified across in that time, all of us were together at Mount Sinai, whether it was in White River Junction, Vermont, or IHOP, or in a synagogue doing a late night mishmar, or in your living room learning with a friend. And there are so many different ways to go about this mission of bringing out the holiness and the sacredness in the world. It's on us to liberate those sparks. And the Judaism Unbound Certificate Program should be a place, and is going to be a place, and already is a place, where people are liberating those sparks, finding that sacredness in their own work and beyond to create a new Jewish future. There's a teaching that the world exists on 3 axes of reality: time, space, and spirit, or Shana, right? The year, Makom, which is the place, and Neshama, which is the spiritedness or the spirituality of it. Unbound Judaism and the certificate program as an extension of that has all 3, right? Shana, we're working in all of these different cohorts, but also connected back to all kinds of cohorts of Jews who have had the same idea, including the original rabbis of Rabbinic Judaism. Makom, we're working on Zoom. What a place, what a place without a place that we all get to be a part of. It's very ethereal. It's very the clouds of God following the Israelites throughout the desert, right? Wherever we are is where it is. And it's not necessarily a place that's on a map, but a place that is actually literally in the cloud, the Zoom cloud, if you will. And Neshama, right? All of the individual unique emanations that each of us have inside of us as Jews who are a part of this tradition trying to expand it. So I personally really like the idea of thinking about these programs and the Judaism Unbound community, not to dilute the term, right, as operating on the axis of Shana, Makom, and Neshama, of time, space, and spirit.
I love it so much. Thank you so much, Rena Yehuda Newman, for joining us in this podcast and as part of our team.
I'm so excited to be here, and I can't wait to get started.
We're overjoyed to have you, and thanks to all of you out there for listening and hopefully for applying to this program. You can head right now to judaismunbound.com/certificate, and you can fill out the initial interest form. That's the first step. It's really quick. You just sort of put your name and your email and a few other quick things. Then you'll be sent application materials. The deadline is approaching very soon. We're grateful to those of you who have already applied, and hopeful that this episode will help spur even more of you to apply. So head to judaismunbound.com/certificate. We can't wait to receive your application. And we'll close out the episode by saying that if you have any questions as you're applying or about applying, you can be in touch with both of us. Just email UnYeshiva, UNYESHIVA, @judaismunbound.com. If for any reason that's tricky, just email lex@judaismunbound.com and or Rena Yehuda, RENAYEHUDA, @judaismunbound.com, and we'll respond to whatever questions you have. We are really revved up about this next cohort and can't wait to experience it with those who join. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.